Hey, hi there. Hip hip hooray. What did I do? My phone keeps crashing, so I'm having a hard time with my messages. Okay. Let's see. So I'm on YouTube.
I'm in Around the World in 80 days.
Sorry, guys, you can't hear me, huh?
Shirley MacLaine as the delectable, incomparable Aouda, Maharani of India.
It was on that picture that I learned how to light myself. Marlene Dietrich taught me. Showed me that the camera should be high and the light should be low, and she taught me about the fine gold chain trick, which is you put one half of a gold chain here, and you take it under your chin, and you put the other half up here, and that helps you with your double chin if you have one. I loved working on that picture, and then we went to Japan on Around the World in 80 Days, and Steve, a large part of his life he spent in Japan, so he felt like he was going home. And it was on that trip that I conceived Sachi, my daughter. After we finished 80 Days, Steve had established a position in the country of being an impresario, so he would go back and forth from here to Japan and do work there, bring work here. So I was more or less alone in Hollywood. The wonderful thing about that is that he didn't demand that I go there. Of course, I never would have anyway. One of the reasons we got married was we both felt that the other was free. And I really did require that. But I was essentially working all the time. And when Sachi was born, I got a nanny, a succession of them, by the way. That is very difficult when you're a working actress and you have a young daughter. I was mostly traipsing around the comedy landscape, although Hot Spell was just solidly a drama. But where I really learned to do the comedy and drama simultaneously was in Sun Came Running.
Based on the second controversial novel by the author of the sensational and memorable From Here to Eternity. A stand-up performance by Shirley MacLaine.
You'll miss the best pal you ever had.
Days.
The character of Ginny was so pathetic, and yet she had such courage and so much selflessness that it made you smile through your tears.
That was the day of Hollywood glamour. And on the scene came this gangly, shaggy-haired, red-headed woman with too much junk jewelry. But was so refreshingly simple and honest. No pretense. This was an amazing kind of debut.
Nobody never been this sweet to me before, Dave. And you're sober, too. Practically.
Yeah.
Dave? Dave, be in love with me? Oh, I love you so much. I never met anybody like you before in my whole life. Oh, I love you so awful much.
When Frank saw the footage of what we had done on Sun Came Running. He wanted to change the ending so that Ginny got in front of the bullet that was intended for him. And he said, let the kid die. Maybe she'll get a nomination. He loved discovering new talent. And that's probably what went on with us. I learned so much from him and Dean. And the whole experience was remarkable.
When she did the Martin and Lewis picture, she got to know Dean very well.
Hey, give me a little kiss.
Sound idea. It's constructive.
You wait right there, and I'll be there in a minute.
I'll wait for you.
When I think through Dean, got to know Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford, that whole right back, and it was only natural that they would take to her as she would take to them, because she was one of the guys. With all of that prettiness and that sexiness that she had, she was still one of the guys.
I was a mascot to them. I was like a pet. I wasn't like a woman. And I didn't even think of myself that way. I had this husband someplace, and I think I was more interested in working and how to develop these different channels for expression anyway. And I saw these men who were fantastic on the stage, and they could stay up all night in Las Vegas and do 2 shows a night and get up at 6 in the morning. All of that was very interesting to me, and their spontaneous humor and their camaraderie. I was really drawn to that. They were my teachers, and I was only 22. I think it was a very exciting, adventurous family because I was essentially alone, and they all knew that. They protected me from some of the sharks in Hollywood. I couldn't have gone off and had a lascivious affair that would have ended up hurting me or gotten married 6 times if I had wanted to, because they were there to protect me more or less.
You know, something about her makes me want to just sort of like, you know, put my arm around her or something. I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure she even really knows what it is, but there's this incredible vulnerability that is in her face and her eyes and the way she carries herself. You can really see it in a movie she made called The Apartment.
Ingredient number 1, a very warm, very wonderful story about a boy, a girl, and a very special kind of problem.
Are we dressing for dinner?
You know, just come as you are.
So you're pretty good with that racket.
You should see my backhand. Where do you think he served the meatballs?
Shirley has always been an instinctive actress. In other words, I might go home and beat a scene to death with a stick until I got it, whereas Shirley would let it go with how she felt, which is why she would like to do scenes, you know, in 2 or 3 takes, because they would be the most fresh, and very often that's true.
We never improvised a thing. And if one word was left out, the script girl would come leaping into the scene and say, cut. Oh, she drove me crazy, that girl.
There's a long scene early in the film where you first see Shirley. She's running the elevator, and the timing is extremely important. And Billy Wilder said, all right, we're going to do it in 1. And Izzy Diamond would be watching what you're saying. He'd be watching the text. So then Billy would come over, and Izzy would go, Billy would go, uh-huh. And he would come over, and he'd say, Shirley, you missed this, you missed that on the first page, and you missed this on the second page. Let's go again, please. Now, finally, about take 12, he made her do the whole damn thing again instead of just a pickup, because he didn't want to cut it anywhere in there. And from that day on, I want to tell you, Shirley came in and she had that script. I think she knew my lines, her lines, everybody's lines.
You know, you're the only one around here who ever takes his hat off in the elevator.
Really?
The characters you meet. Something happens to men in elevators. Must be the change of altitude. The blood rushes to their head or something. Boy, I could tell you stories that
I'd
would
love to hear about it. Maybe we could have lunch in the cafeteria sometime. Or some evening after work.
27.
Oh,
I hope everything goes all right.
I hope so. But you know, they call me on a day like this, where it's like cold and how do I look?
Fine. Wait.
Thank you. You know, that's the first thing I ever noticed about you. When you were still in the local elevator, you always wore a flower.
Good luck. And wipe your nose.
We were, I guess, the safe duo on the screen. It was like high school sweethearts, I guess.
You guys want to hear something funny?
Maybe possibly two older sisters.
I'm trying to get a pizza. I want to order a pizza. I want someone to buy it for me.
What I did do for the
I've never had a
Shirley and Bob
person
Mitchell
online
really
buy me
sparked each
pizza,
other. They
so
liked each
I'm
other very
trying.
much. And they
I'm
used
hungry.
to live and kid each other and had jokes going right and left, laughing and laughing. It was an enormous stretch for her. I was playing this supposed Jewish girl from New York City. But she did it wonderfully well, I thought.
Brother, how long have you been on the wagon?
A year?
Well, you been in jail?
She could portray the various qualities that are needed in the character that she's portraying, because she is not herself as a particularly vulnerable person. She's very forthright, very strong, and she knows her own mind.
I didn't think in terms of, would this be good for my career, or I don't like this scene, you'd better fix it. I never did very much of that. I just sort of went with the punches. Enjoyed the people I was working with. If I didn't enjoy anyone I was working with, there was no question in my mind. I'd just walk away. I was wearing a can-can dress that weighed 75 pounds, courtesy of Irene Sheriff. They asked Juliet Prowse and myself to do the can-can, which was choreographed for, I suppose, gold medal athletes, because when you do the can-can for the film, you can rest after each one of the turns. But they wanted us to do it all at once to entertain Khrushchev. I thought I would go into cardiac arrest. That's what I remember that day. And then he wasn't too pleased when the press asked him, what did you think of the can-can? And he said, I think the face of humanity is prettier than its backside. So they asked me what I thought of what he said, and I said, I think he's upset because we wore panties. Because in the old days in France, they didn't wear panties, and that was the whole point. When you kicked, that's what you saw. This feeling of life being
Definitely more
important
French
behind
than
the camera
English.
and around the camera than in front of the camera was always with me.
Wink,
I
wink.
never felt empty in Hollywood. I think because things were going well, it afforded me the opportunity and the freedom to explore elsewhere. I never did it out of a sense of loneliness, although I was alone a lot. But I had a lot of love affairs during that time that took up a great deal of my emotional life. We had a marriage that respected that in one another. Steve was living in Japan, so he had his own relationships going. He used to try to get me to go to premieres with good-looking men, and I thought that was so silly. I would go in my convertible Plymouth and go up and do my interviews and walk along the red carpet and go out the ladies' room in the back and go home. You know, it was all such an obvious media grope.
I think the roles that attract Shirley the most, certainly the roles that she's very famous for, are roles in which the character is slightly victimized. She's the little man struggling against forces that are bigger than she is.
I remember Lou Wasserman asked me if I wanted to do charity, and I said, yes, I'd love to, and I think Bobby Fosse should direct it. He said, who's Bobby Fosse? And I said, he's a choreographer, but he's a great director. I just know it.
So full of rhythm, color, movement, life, it will set the musical comedy pace for years to come. That's Sweet Charity. That's Sweet Charity. That's Sweet Charity. Starring Shirley MacLaine as
Charity. Charity Hope Valentine.
in the performance of a lifetime.
What you do in bed is your business. No, you see, I wasn't even in bed. I was in the closet.
To each his own.
There is again another example of her ability to be vulnerable and funny at the same time. She somehow manages to do it in a way that she's smiling through the pain, which is a quality that again makes her vulnerable and endearing. It's like she's trying to rise above the sadness of the situation at all times.
And I remembered that when I did Some Came Running, that if you really play the character truthfully, everything is the truth, then the comedy will be funnier and the drama will be sadder.
She has wit on the screen, and she has the ability to make us laugh without chasing cheap laughs. I mean, she's wry, she's dry, she's never overly sentimental. She's an artist.
I was never a sex symbol, and I was not a great beauty, so the character is what mattered to me. I had always wanted to do character parts. I guess basically that's what I was a character actress, rather than an ingenue or even a leading lady. I look for those aspects of human life that are authentic and real, regardless of whether they're attractive. Well, 40 is not an older person, I don't think. But that's what happens to you in Hollywood. They seem to think of you as an older person when you're 40. The parts that I did around that period were the possession of Joel Delaney and desperate characters, but the scripts didn't work. The pictures didn't work. Anyway, I worked for George McGovern, whom I adored. I thought he was a very moral man. So that when scripts would come along, I would turn them down because I was working for McGovern. It was probably worth me giving up my career to try to defeat Richard Nixon, is the way I looked at that. I met Shirley a long time ago when I first ran for the United States Congress, and she was interested in my strong positions. She was extremely selfless and generous in helping me in many ways. None of it was to put Shirley forward. She was forward without me. I was the beneficiary of her, obviously her fame. And then after that, I went to China. I was really interested in seeing this country that I had sat in a hotel room in Hong Kong and peered over the new territories and thought, what are they doing over there? And I took a women's delegation. I took about 8 to 12 people, including the crew, that came from all different walks of life. And the way they related to this revolution was what I filmed. I wanted to show what the revolution had perpetrated in relation to women. It's called The Other Half of the Sky, which the Chinese refer to as the female of the species. They're the other half of the sky. My persona was my passport to go anywhere. I could go anywhere in the world, and did. I traveled all over the world by myself. And because I was who I was invited into all sorts of levels of society. By the time I got finished with politics in China, I don't think there was much career for me in Hollywood. So what I decided to do was return to my roots. I went back to ballet class and put together an act.
I received a phone call. The voice at the other end said, "This is Shirley MacLaine." I felt sure one of my friends was playing a trick on me. Anyhow, she said that she was interested in doing an act in Vegas that Gwen Verdon had recommended. And when Shirley decided to do a Vegas act, that was like a very brave step. I mean, you're one person, you're out there holding the entire evening. It's not even like playing a character or being in a play.
You have to find your stage identity. You have to really know who you are on the stage. You have to have lived a little, died a little, had your heart broken a little, been triumphant a little, failed a lot, and been able to have, I guess, experienced yourself in public. Then you know sort of who you are when you walk out there. It's called getting your stage legs, I think. And it's only really about who you are, not what you do. That's all they want to know is who you are.
Shirley is not the best dancer in the business, the best singer in the business, but she proved that she's one of the best entertainers in the business.
Imagine me at the Lido, the most famous nightclub in the whole world, and I'm going to play it. I played the Palace, and I played the Dumps. I can do pliés, and I can do bumps. I've taken my bows, and I've taken my lumps. Lord help me, I love it.
Shirley has this this sense of reality that she shares with people. It's not a movie star pretension. It's just being one of the guys. She's in a beautiful gown, but there's no BS. She says what she thinks, and the audience bombs onto that. She's one of them.
When I read a script and my scalp tingles, I know I should do it. The one script that worked after I had reached that so-called of a certain age was The Turning Point. And that was about two women who had to face the decisions that they had made when they were younger and what that meant to them today. The character of Dee Dee was nothing of what I would have done. My character would have been more like Emma, who was the Anne Bancroft part. But I knew a lot of women who had made the decisions to give up the ballet and go and just become a mother and perhaps a teacher, like Dee Dee had done.
Shirley and I come from a tribe of people called dancers. Gypsies are known for their fortitude, for their humor, for their endurance, for their talent, and for their unflagging devotion to the show. She understood the frustration of the character, but she brought some very, very special gifts to the interpretation of Dee Dee. And the hunger that the character had for recognition, which is a very important part of Shirley's psychology. Still, she has this hunger for recognition.
Even though I was playing a part that I couldn't identify with. Just to be back in the world of the ballet, it swirled me back to my childhood and to my beginnings. I had such a structured family life in Virginia with the underlying reality that they didn't really want it, that they thought they should raise children this way, that I never really wanted a structured family life. I wanted unpredictability. I wanted each day to be different. As a result, my daughter is much more conservative than I am. And usually children are more liberal than their parents. I would create the reality every minute that I found at my disposal, and I didn't very often do the same things twice. I think I still live that way.
I think that she has not been the most conventional wife and mother in the world, but I think she had great feelings, both originally for her husband, as she still does for her daughter, but has always felt that the pivot to her personality was the capacity to share her work, her talent, her writing, her acting, her dancing, and her involvement in the things she deeply believed in. Shirley sees everything as a constructive experience. Even her marriage to Steve, which was, finally terminated and so on. Not many of us can do that, If there's been, reasons in our lives that we feel were unpleasant, we try to sort of forget about it. Shirley always incorporates it, sees it as some lesson to be learned, some experience that you had to go through, and that it helps to make you a stronger person.
Well, my response to someone who has a life outside of acting is a very warm, positive response, because I think it is the most important philosophical way to live, and that is to live beyond the camera, or live beyond one's work, because, for example, I'm not my work, I'm not what I do. I think it takes a lot of time and wisdom to learn that. So I don't know Shirley that well, but I know she has an avid interest in everything. I think she's one of these actresses who she moves within her personality. She moves within the age of her personality. She doesn't try to fight that. She's moved on since then, instead of, like many people, fighting the process of time. She just does it. She's probably done 40, 45 features for almost every studio in town, and almost each part has been different and demanded a different portion of her talent on the screen, all the way from the Martin and Lewis pictures where she was romping around singing and dancing, to Terms of Endearment where she was a mother.
Oh, Mama, that's the first time I stopped hugging first. I like that.
Get yourself a decent maternity dress. You have to get one in. The transition into being an older actress was not all that difficult. It really came down to where are the great parts, rather than what do I look like and what will they think of me.
This ability to access tremendous depth, so she could do a very poetic gesture that would convey a great deal, and make you feel a lot, like in Terms of Endearment, when Deborah Winger dies and she looks away. It was heartbreaking.
Aurora Greenway personifies so many aspects of femaledom. You either know somebody like Aurora or think that you are Aurora. She's my favorite character.
How are you? It's not my fault, but I'm sorry.
He wanted to get me on my back. He just had to ask me.
It didn't have one note, it had many notes. And it had many opportunities to show a big range of talent: sadness, joy, happiness. It encompassed many qualities, all of which Shirley has, by the way. The minute I saw the picture, I knew she was going to get an Oscar.
Send me $100.
Shirley's a very
Send me
strange
$100 and I'll turn on the camera.
She came on the scene as a gamin, a waif.
Send me $100,
She
asshole.
refers to it as victim characters. We are aware of her political involvements, her feminist viewpoints, her metaphysical explorations. Through the press and books, we've seen her grow up. And there still is that original quality. However, she has become a very strong individual. She's outspoken, she's forthright. And if she keeps going, she could wind up like the character she plays in Steel Magnolias.
Maybe sometime I could arrange for us all to get together.
You're the one that will not
Maybe
give me
not.
any money, so
Well, why
stop
not?
calling me.
Shelby.
I don't like you.
I managed
Go
in a
the
few
fuck
decades
away.
to marry the two most worthless men in the universe, and then proceeded to have the three most ungrateful children ever conceived. The only reason people are nice to me is because I have more money than God. Now, I'm not about to open a new can of worms. Weezer. What? If this is really how you feel, it isn't healthy. Maybe you should think about coming down to the guidance center and talking to someone with their help. I'm not crazy, Malin. I've just been in a very bad mood for 40 years.
I had written the screenplay. I'd adapted my play for the screen. And when they when they started rattling off the names, well, I think it's going to be Sally Field. I think it's going to be Daryl Hannah. I think it's going to be Julia Roberts. It's going to be Olympia Cox. And it was going to be Shirley MacLaine. Everyone knows someone who's completely irascible, irritating, irrepressible, infuriating, and lovable. And that's who Shirley had come to my little hometown to play. After making this decision that we would test to see what she looked like without makeup.
My nose
I
is
guess
so
I'm a character
sore.
actress now, she said to me. And she said, and if I'm going to do that, I got to go the distance. I got to go all the way. And so she did. Brave for an actress to work without any makeup.
All the men on Steel Magnolias, the crew and the above-the-line men, thought there would be a colossal catfight between the six of us. The opposite happened. We banded together and understood each other in ways, without even speaking, that the rest of the crew couldn't comprehend. They all talked about it. We made friends on that film that exist to this day.
Miss Weezer, what? There's somebody that wants to see you. Who? I've opened a can of worms for you. What?
Hell! Owen Jenkins.
Oh, Louisa, remember me?
My God, you look different. You shrunk.
You look terrific. You've hardly changed at all.
I'm not as sweet as I used to be.
When the cast of Steel Magnolias first arrived on the set, which was in my hometown in Natchitoches, Louisiana, it was a surreal experience. And there was a call, and this voice says, "This is Shirley MacLaine. I'm just over here at my house, and I was sitting out on the wharf, just not doing anything. I thought maybe you'd like to come over." It was Shirley's way of saying, "Okay, I'm here. I'm doing this film, this script that you wrote. I want to know everything." And I believe I went over and we sat on the wharf, and we sat there for hours and hours into the wee hours, just talking about every aspect of her character and life in this town. And she was doing her research, but she was also doing what Shirley does best, which is a seeker and a searcher.
I think that Shirley believes in magic. I mean, I think that she believes in, that perhaps there are no coincidences, that there are no accidents.
Well, I think I've been a mystic since I was very young. I think I've always known there's something that is something I almost purposefully chose. I always felt that if I could get into sync with what the destiny was I chose, I would be happy. And I've relatively done that. That's got nothing to do with religion or nothing to do with it's a kind of spiritual knowing that resides at the bottom of one's own identity.
I think Aurora Greenway is one of the great heroines of film. She is a mass of contradictions. She has extremely strict morals, but then of course will bend them when they need to be bent. I think that's one of the reasons that she must be such a joy for Shirley to play, because it's an opportunity for an actress to express absolutely every trait of a human being.
I think Aurora will probably be on my tombstone. Love her. And to go from terms of endearment and how many people identified with that whole dysfunctional family to Evening Star, 15 years later, and facing how she has not done a good job in raising the grandchildren, but also cannot understand the pain that young people seem to be going through because she is so indomitable. If your mother had lived, she would be so horrified at the way you turned out.
If my mother had lived, I wouldn't have turned out this way.
How much younger is she than you?
Much.
At least you found the great love of your life.
Come on, don't give me that. You've had great loves. Or love great. Whatever.
Well, the love that I felt and the love that they felt somehow didn't coincide. But I'm still looking.
There she is. The evening star. She shines first. She shines brightest. And she shines longest.
I want to take a ride on your disco stick.
I think I've always fashioned my life in a way that didn't have boundaries and didn't have restrictions. That's the brilliance of trust and taking it day by day. And I think I feel that I go day by day with everything, moment by moment with everything. That's the secret I've learned. You can't make any kinds of plans, basically. Life is what happens to you while you make another plan.
If they could see me now, that little gang of mine, I'm eating fancy chow and drinking fancy wine. I'd like those stumble bums to see for a fact the kind of top drawer, first rate chums I attract. All I can say is, wow, look at where I am. Tonight I landed, pow, right in a pot of jam. What a setup, holy cow. They'd never believe it if my friends could see me now.
Is it over?
Arguably the greatest female star ever to come out of the studio system. For over half a century, Elizabeth Taylor's extraordinary beauty and talent saw her make over 50 films, win 5 Academy nominations, and bag 2 Oscars.
I don't think there'll ever be another movie star like Elizabeth Taylor.
She was a star of enormous worldwide magnitude.
I can't think of one single actress today that comes even close.
You've got at me. You don't have to do anything, George. 1,000 years of you has been quite enough.
She was one of these formidable, beautiful creatures that just had a laser-like intensity when you watched her act.
Truth. Truth. Everybody keeps hollering about the truth.
She was so bright and so smart and so intuitive in acting and in her friendships.
Famous for more than just her films, in her turbulent private life, she was a divorcee at 18, a widow at 26, and one half of the greatest love affair of the 20th century.
She was a collector of men and a collector of jewels and a very good friend.
She lived life to the fullest, wore her sensuality and sexuality with grace and style.
There will never be a woman in film, the American scene, like Elizabeth Taylor.
The last survivor of Hollywood's golden age. Tonight, we pay tribute to the world's most iconic film star, Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Famed as one of the most beautiful women in the world. For over half a century, Elizabeth Taylor's dramatic dark looks and vibrant violet eyes captivated audiences and made an indelible impression on all who met her.
The first time you met her, you couldn't take your eyes off her. It was amazing. Nature did her well.
I do remember thinking, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever been this close to. She did turn to me, and she turned the eyes full on to me, and it was an extraordinary experience. It was like a sort of mist swam in front of my eyes. It was just total knockout beauty.
All of us at school just thought she was so gorgeous, and we all wanted to look like her. She was astonishingly good looking. I don't think Elizabeth ever really thought how beautiful she was. She wasn't a person who was always looking in the mirror and, you know, saying, oh, am I beautiful? You know, everybody else was saying that.
It was this extraordinary beauty which first caught the attention of MGM Studios. They signed her up and gave her a role in Lassie Come Home at the age of 8.
Poor Lassie. Poor Lassie. Poor girl.
When Elizabeth did Lassie Come Home, I think the studio really saw her potential in that.
Encouraged by her ambitious mother, by the age of 12, Elizabeth secured her first major role in the film National Velvet.
She certainly had some of the key attributes of the part. Had to have an English accent, that's the grand national. She had to know about horses, she knew about horses, but she didn't really have a box office following yet.
It said that people went to see the latest Mickey Rooney film, but left talking about Elizabeth Taylor.
He's beautiful. He's new. I've never seen him before.
He's got lots of vinegar, I'll grant you.
It's almost hard to believe looking back, but Mickey Rooney was the far greater star. It was his picture. But the moment that Elizabeth Taylor appears on screen, the picture is hers. She mesmerizes the camera.
He's loose. David, did you see him take that thing?
Come back to the castle.
Whoa! There, what a lovely boy he is.
I think Elizabeth loved making National Velvet because she always had a passion for horses. And she was a wonderful rider from the time she was a very little girl, you know, when she came over from England. So she would have been heartbroken if she hadn't played the part.
Although the role seemed made for her, initially the studios weren't convinced. But the young and determined Elizabeth Taylor wasn't about to take no for an answer.
I desperately wanted the part because it was me. It was my whole life, my relationship and love for horses. And the producer saw me and he said, well, I'm very sorry, Elizabeth. You're very sweet and you're very talented and very nice, but you're just too small. You know, no one would believe it. And I guess it was the natural time in my life for growing. But I mean, I was swinging from doors to make myself grow. I did 40 jumps every morning. I ate steak for breakfast, lunch, dinner. I exercised. I literally stretched myself, and I grew 3 inches in 3 months. And Pandro Berman, the producer, had the marks on his door. And he said, with that kind of tenacity, honey, you got the part. She went and did a lot of having her spine pulled to get the role in National Velvet. And I think that upset her spine. No, you don't do that to a 12-year-old or 13. And I think that that's what started her pain problems.
Elizabeth was fearless, and in the film often did much of the riding herself. But she was also accident-prone, and the combination proved disastrous.
During the filming of National Velvet, Elizabeth had the first of many accidents on set to do with filming, where she fell from her horse and broke her back. It marked the beginning of a whole series of filming-related and off-screen accidents and illnesses.
When her friend Margaret O'Brien starred with her in the film Little Women, she witnessed another such accident.
I remember one time she broke her leg. In fact, I think I have a picture of Elizabeth and her cast, and then she had everybody sign her cast. She was terribly accident prone. I mean, if there was a splinter flying around on the set, it would end up in Elizabeth's eye.
Richard Brooks, the director, said if you put a chair in the middle of the room and nothing else in the room, Elizabeth Taylor will find a way to trip over that chair. So she was accident prone and suffered terribly on some of these things, but always seemed to bounce back.
By the age of 18, she'd already made 10 films. Rigidly controlled by the studio system, the next step in her life also ran like an MGM production.
Hollywood's wedding of the year at the Beverly Hills Catholic Church as lovely British-born screen star Elizabeth Taylor arrives with her father, Elton Jr., crowning a romance everybody's been interested in.
It was decided partly by the studio, partly by her own family. It would be a very good idea if she settled down and got married. And Nicky Hilton was the husband of choice.
It's very clear that marriage to Nicky Hilton was one that the studio wanted and manipulated into happening. Elizabeth went along very happily because Nicky Hilton seemed like a great...
The impressive wedding cake is cut. Film fans everywhere join the reception guests in wishing the newlyweds good luck, long life, and happiness.
The whole wedding at the church was completely stage managed by MGM, down to the bridesmaids were all MGM stock players. And the MGM set design people had decorated the church. So it was really quite the MGM production.
The world's happiest honeymooners, glamorous film star Elizabeth Taylor and her husband Nick Hilton arrive at Norfolk. They've been to Paris and now hope to visit Ascot.
We've been in Paris for about a week. It was just wonderful. We had such a gay time.
But the fairy tale didn't last. Within 30 weeks of the wedding, Elizabeth shocked her fans by announcing their separation.
The marriage was a total failure. It didn't last much beyond the honeymoon stage, apparently, because Nicky Hilton, very rich, the heir to the hotel chain, was a heavy drinker and beat her up. And that was it. She decided she wasn't going to have that anymore.
He looked very nice when you talked to him, so I'm sure that she didn't see any of this in him at the time, but it happened. And I think she was very smart to get out of the marriage as fast as she did. And I know, of course, the studio and her parents then did not want her to stay with him. And she didn't.
And I think it was from that moment on that Elizabeth Taylor said, I am going to take control of my life. Not my mother, not the studio, not any husband.
Demonstrating her unique ability to bounce back, Elizabeth threw herself into her next film, and the most challenging role to date.
I think the ultimate Elizabeth Taylor movie is The Place in the Sun, the George Stevens movie, in which she was so beautiful. She was 18, I think, or 19. She was playing opposite Montgomery Clift.
I go anywhere with
You really mean that? You'd marry me?
Haven't I told you? I intend to.
In A Place in the Sun, she seems to have a kind of recklessness about her that's very appealing. She demonstrates a complete lack of concern for her own physical safety when she executes one of the most impressive feints in cinema history. The second really significant part about that film is that it introduced her to Montgomery Clift, who she claims taught her everything there is to know about acting.
Montgomery Clift was her best friend ever, I think, male or female. She had a great deal of motherly protection of Montgomery Clift, who she regarded as a brilliant actor and kind of weak. And she liked to hug him and feel sorry for him. And he drank a lot, and she felt very badly for him. Elizabeth went all the way on things. She loved.
She was one of these formidable, beautiful creatures that just had a laser-like intensity when you watched her act. She just kind of nailed you with those eyes.
She had these amazing close-ups when she grabs Montgomery Clift and she says, tell mama, oh. Tell mama. Tell mama. And they are just so beautiful. It's quite mesmerizing.
It was the first time I'd ever said, I love you, except to a dog or a horse. And it was the first time I've really been kissed on the screen. And I think it is one of the more romantic roles that I've ever been given.
The film opened to critical acclaim and propelled Elizabeth Taylor's career from cute child star to beautiful leading lady. Off-camera romance was also in the air. Less than a year after her divorce from Nicky Hilton, her second engagement to actor Michael Wilding was announced.
All cameras at London Airport are focused on two people very much in love. Britain's Michael Wilding and his lovely young bride-to-be, Elizabeth Taylor.
Michael Wilding needed somebody who would boost his career and take his name up a few notches in Hollywood. And Elizabeth Taylor was her with a stable home life, with a solid husband and a couple of kids. And of course, what Elizabeth provided to Michael Wilding was a step up the ladder in Hollywood.
Elizabeth's marriage to Michael Wilding was sort of on the rebound from the bad marriage. And he was a very nice, sweet, gentle person who would have been the opposite of Nicky Hilton. And I think that's why she married him.
Despite difficulties, the marriage lasted 4 years, and they had 2 children, Michael and Christopher.
I think it was a very sweet, positive marriage, but it didn't give her that great love that she was looking for.
In 1956, Elizabeth's next major film would become another classic. Co-starring Hollywood heartthrobs James Dean and Rock Hudson, Giant cast her as the feisty female lead once more.
She plays the young sort of temptress who seduces and wins the Rock Hudson character extremely well, with this kind of impish, cheeky sexuality.
Part of the tension in Giant is that she's from the East Coast, and this is rough frontier America, entirely dominated by men. But she takes on the men.
You don't feel well, Leslie.
I feel just great. My adrenaline glands are pumping beautifully.
Oh! There really was an enormous symmetry between this character in Giant and the real-life Elizabeth.
You knew what a frightful girl I was when you married me. I did not deceive you, sir. From the very first moment, I couldn't have been more unpleasant. Anyway.
On Giant, both Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson were facing similar challenges. They were both known primarily for being beautiful, for being kind of glamorous movie stars rather than being actors. I think they came on the film under similar circumstances. And of course, Elizabeth adored gay men, trusted gay men. So right away, I think she felt, oh, here's somebody I can be friends with.
Jordan, you would think somebody had spoiled you terribly. Your wife or something.
I haven't any wife. I live with my sister.
Why aren't you married, Jordan?
She had this wonderful relationship with gay men where she didn't have to worry about the sexual tensions. She didn't have to worry about them hitting on her. And she could trust them in a way that she felt she could do with no one else.
I think among her many cardinal virtues was loyalty. I mean, when she talked about her friends, whether it was James Dean, Rock Hudson, once Elizabeth felt that connection with someone, it stayed. It was unshakable.
But it was her friendship with the troubled young James Dean which would have the most profound effect on Elizabeth.
They were set to shoot one of the last scenes of the picture. James Dean had already finished all of his shots in the picture. And so they were called to the set, Elizabeth and Rock, and they got the news that James Dean had been killed in a car accident. Elizabeth was unable to proceed that day and went home sick and was not able to come back to the studio for several days to finish making the picture.
Dean's death devastated Elizabeth. Days after it was announced, she was admitted to hospital suffering depression. It was some weeks before she was well enough to return to finish the film.
She held up production, much to the irritation of George Stevens, but her later scenes drew upon some of that depth of feeling, drew upon her loss, and I think gave them power.
Her next film, Raintree County, gave her her first Oscar nomination, and with it came the critical acclaim that had previously eluded her. But it was her private life that would once again take center stage. A day after the separation from her second husband was announced, another suitor came knocking at the MGM door.
I think Elizabeth was in love with love. I really do. And I think she was an incredible romantic. And she was working in this MGM since she was a child. And I think she was always in search of the perfect man. I think she found her perfect man in Mike Todd.
The difference that from the Wilding marriage was that they actually were also head over heels in love with each other. So it worked on many levels.
Elizabeth Taylor married the fabulous Mike Todd early in 1957, and their marriage carried with it the electricity of two exciting personalities. Hollywood, the world, was their stage.
Mike Todd was a swashbuckling entrepreneur type who had thrown all his resources into making it this gigantic blockbuster movie around the world in 80 days. And he just sort of overwhelmed her. He was more flamboyant than she was.
It was Mike Todd who started Elizabeth's lifelong love of jewels. In the coming months, he would shower her with millions of dollars worth.
What sort of fellow is Mike to live with?
Well, I think he's the nicest person I've ever lived with. No, he's a wonderful man. He has everything that you could possibly want, and he's very generous.
There was a great story where Elizabeth's swimming in the pool, and Mike comes over and he says, "You know, I have something for you." And Elizabeth, pregnant, swimming in this grand pool, opens this box, and lo and behold, there are these Cartier Burmese rubies and diamonds suite. And Todd hands her another box, and there's the necklace, and there's a ring, and there's a tiara, and it just goes on and on. You'd be hard pressed to find a more beautiful, radiant, pregnant woman. And that's the dream factor about Elizabeth. You know, that is Elizabeth to a T. She's swimming, she's pregnant, but she's wearing the best jewelry in the world.
By 1958, Elizabeth Taylor had 3 children and was happily settled in her third marriage, when she starred alongside Paul Newman to make one of the best films of her career.
MGM originally wanted to make Cat on a Hot Tin Roof as a black and white picture. And Richard Brooks said, "You can't do this. I've got the most beautiful eyes on the planet, Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman. You can't do this to me. We need color for this picture." And MGM still said no. And it took Mike Todd going to the MGM brass and saying, "This picture will be made in color," for the studio to change its mind.
Living with somebody you love can be lonelier than living entirely alone. And the one you love doesn't love you.
Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, a Tennessee Williams play, centers around the character Maggie and her troubled marriage to a man who refuses to sleep with her.
You can't even stand drinking out of the same glass, can you?
It was a performance that demanded a lot more depth from her than possibly anything she'd done before. And she was equal to it.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Like what, Maggie?
Like you were just looking?
Look at her leading men at that time. You needed big people to cope with Elizabeth Taylor as an actress. And if you don't have a real actor, she eats them alive. And Paul Newman, is the tops, and he can cope with Elizabeth Taylor. But I think it says something very flattering about her acting career that they had to put Hollywood's greatest leading men opposite her.
You know what I feel like? I feel all the time like a cat on a hot tin roof.
Then jump off the roof, Maggie. Jump off it. Cats jump off roofs and they land uninjured. Do it. Jump.
Jump where? Into what?
Take a lover.
I don't deserve that.
It's a very sexy, very feminine, very passionate performance.
Lean on me, baby.
Those eyes, those lips, those shoulders, those breasts, that figure. I mean, that torso.
There is a famous poster of her in a low-cut negligee sitting on a bed. That was quite a risky and a risque still to promote the film with in those days. And that began to build the image of the femme fatale, which she was becoming in private life as well as public life. But the filming of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was interrupted by a cruel twist of fate. In March 1958, Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd had been married 13 months when he set off on a trip from which he would never return.
In the private plane named for his wife, the drama of the showman reaches fini. He was rarely without her, as in these last films of him alive. Mike Todd left Elizabeth Taylor in Hollywood and flew to his death in an isolated mountain valley 22 miles southwest of Grants, New Mexico. A writer, Art Cohen, a pilot and co-pilot lost their lives with Mr. Todd. Unofficial theory blames the crash on icing, which it is said the pilot reported a few minutes before the crash.
I felt terrible for Elizabeth because I felt that was probably the right man she finally met for her, and that this was a good marriage. And, what a tragedy this was to finally meet the right person, and then he was taken from her.
Later on, Elizabeth would say that if Mike hadn't died, they would have been married for the rest of their lives.
She told me that she never stopped thinking about Mike Todd every day of her life till the end of her life.
When Mike Todd died, filming for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was postponed. But only 2 weeks later, the broken-hearted actress was forced back to work.
It was hard to do the film because of the emotional pain I was under. It was doubly hard for me. Some of the lines hit home so badly.
I know what it's like to lose somebody you love.
Careful, Maggie. Your claws are showing.
I thought she was fabulous in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She made that when she was really upset. And I think the drama in her life was able to be transcended onto the screen.
Even under such emotional strain, Elizabeth managed to turn in a performance that would win her a second Oscar nomination. It would also send her into the arms of her late husband's best friend, singer Eddie Fisher.
Eddie was called Todd's best friend. Whether he was his best friend or not, he was certainly very much entrenched in the Todd organization. So it's very natural that he would have been around to look in on Elizabeth and take care of her.
Eddie Fisher befriended her during the whole episode following Todd's death. Fisher was a very good friend to her.
Eddie Fisher, of course, admitted later on that he had had the hots for Elizabeth for some time. And, from taking care of her to consoling her quickly led to romantic feelings on his part and eventually on her part as well.
Not only was Eddie Fisher Mike Todd's best friend, he was also married to Hollywood sweetheart Debbie Reynolds. News of the affair with Elizabeth became the scandal of the decade.
Debbie Reynolds, everybody adored because she was in Singing in the Rain and she seemed so innocent, lovely. They were an ideal couple. And this woman goes and breaks up this ideal Hollywood marriage.
Well, I know Elizabeth was looked at as the painted lady that stole Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds. But I don't think Elizabeth was really thinking at that time, because she was still getting over Mike Todd.
Oscar night in Hollywood, when the motion picture world names its top performers of the year and the greatest picture.
In 1959, Elizabeth was the firm favorite to win the Best Actress Oscar for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But once again, she was overlooked by the Academy.
Susan Hayward, I want to live.
There were certainly people who felt that she should have got the Oscar, but that her Oscar hopes were blighted by her off-screen scandal, which was a huge scandal.
By the age of 28, Elizabeth Taylor had divorced 2 husbands and tragically lost a third. With her private life playing out like one of her celluloid sagas, she went from Hollywood royalty to scandalous homewrecker. But again, Elizabeth's fighting spirit saw her through, and the next film would elevate her to superstardom once more.
Cleopatra marked a huge stage in Liz Taylor's career, personally and professionally.
Cleopatra was the biggest movie that Fox were going to make. That's 20th Century Fox. And they decided that I was going to play Cleopatra. And they were going to go ahead and make the movie with me.
Don't you love me? Don't you want Egypt? Don't you want the world?
So I did all these tests, and I thought I was going to get the part. And then the budget climbed and climbed and climbed. I have no idea why it climbed. I think they decided to make sets in England at Pinewood or something, and they cost a lot. So they told me, well, they didn't tell me. My agent told me, yeah, they're not going to use you. They're going to use Elizabeth.
Fox wanted Elizabeth Taylor to play Cleopatra. So they said, sure, that's great. She'll play the part. She wants $1 million for it.
It was unheard of. I think the most that actors ever got in those days was like 150,000, 250,000, maybe if you were Marlon Brando or Gregory Peck.
The $1 million deal made history. The studios even set up a press conference when the contract was signed. Elizabeth Taylor had become the highest paid star in the world.
She went on to film Cleopatra in London, which was madness in itself, because films set in Egypt and Rome, and they're filming in London. Where the hell are they going to get the weather from? So, and the weather actually played an important part in what happened next, because she was flimsily dressed as Cleopatra in rather cold conditions at Pinewood Studios, and she contracted pneumonia, very, very bad pneumonia. She had a tracheostomy, and indeed she nearly died. Over a 3-week period, Elizabeth Taylor fought for her life while the eyes of the world looked on. Amongst the many news reports, one even prematurely announced her death.
My agent, Jay Cantor, called, and he said, Elizabeth has been taken very ill. She's been rushed to the hospital. She's not expected to live. So I want you to stay by the phone all day, because if she dies, you're going to have to take the night plane to London, and they're going to put you in her costumes and they're going to start shooting with you. I said, that's terrible. How awful. I don't want her to die. I mean, and I would just feel so dreadful. He said, look, honey, that's showbiz.
Of course, crowds collected outside the London clinic when it was known that Liz Taylor would soon be leaving. They waited hours to see her and to film the scene. And what an amazing scene it was when she was brought out in a wheelchair. Everyone knows the story of her very grave illness, and now there were so many well-wishers crowding round, it was an impossible job getting her to the road. Soon after her recovery, the next Oscars were announced. Again, Elizabeth was in the running for Best Actress for a film she'd made the previous year, Butterfield 8.
There was a groundswell of public sympathy for her for having survived, which she thinks, and a lot of other people think, accounted for the fact that she absolutely walked away with the Oscar for Butterfield 8.
Things move to a climax as all eyes are on Yul Brynner and the Best Actress of the Year award. Elizabeth Taylor. Convalescing from her recent grave illness, Elizabeth Taylor receives a prolonged accolade from the audience. It's a popular choice, an Oscar for the beauty who is a winner after 4 successive tries.
In Butterfield 8, she plays an alcoholic prostitute, a role that Elizabeth was initially reluctant to take.
I think Elizabeth's performance in Butterfield 8 is one of the most honest portrayals of a woman's sexuality that had been on screen up until that time. She plays a young woman who enjoys having fun, who enjoys having sex, who has her life in her own hands. And I think audiences would have been quite surprised by such honesty from a picture, and because it's also what they perhaps suspected was about Elizabeth in real life as well.
Can I help you with anything? Elspeth?
And after she got the Oscar for Butterfield 8, she went back to filming Cleopatra, which now very sensibly they moved to Rome. And the cast had changed. Originally, Peter Finch was supposed to play Mark Antony, but he'd had to drop out because of other commitments. And so Richard Burton came in.
You will kneel. I will what? On your knees. You dare ask the proconsul of the Roman Empire?
I asked it of Julius Caesar. I demand it of you.
With Richard Burton came the big, what Burton always referred to as Le Scandale, the big love affair. He was married to Sybil, she was married to Eddie Fisher, but I think once they got together on the stage of Cleopatra, pow.
When they met, she said she saw him for the first time. He had a terrible hangover and his hand was shaking, and she found this endearing. But then when they did their first kiss, the director had to say, "Okay, it's time for lunch. Can you stop that now?" They wouldn't stop the kiss.
It was obvious to everyone on the set that these two people were falling in love, that the chemistry between them was so thick, and they would disappear. They'd turn, where are they? They're not here to shoot this scene while they're off in the dressing room together.
I was very young when they were together, but I do remember seeing them together quite a lot. I think Burton felt that to have the most beautiful, glamorous woman in the world showering her passion on you was just completely intoxicating. He couldn't do anything about it. It hit him like a ton of bricks.
Beginning with tonight. You must never envy Caesar or anyone, anything again.
Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor were the two most extraordinary people that I ever met. I think she found in him a match, and Richard loved being the one who was adored by the one and only Elizabeth.
It didn't take long for the press to get wind of the adulterous affair. Again, Elizabeth found herself at the center of a scandal.
Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton didn't apologize for falling in love, and that's what made them so different. And that's what made them so subversive in some ways, and it frightened a lot of people. The Vatican called them moral vagrants, and they were denounced in the halls of Congress and in Parliament. And it was this sense that they were flouting the very rules of society.
I remember the first picture that I saw was on the cover of an Italian magazine called Novella 2000, and it was Elizabeth and Richard lying on a yacht together. Apparently, they could not go anywhere without the paps there.
2 years after finishing Cleopatra, the pair finalized their divorces and married in March 1964.
Everybody was fascinated by them. On their own, they had been, but together, there was just something. They were just this wonderful double act of a sort of moody and poetic, sort of literary Shakespearean actor and this tempestuous Hollywood goddess.
They became the template for the modern celebrity now. Their lives were no longer protected, and they had to have an entourage to protect them. And everything they did became public knowledge.
With Richard, Elizabeth was able to lead the life of a Hollywood superstar once more.
Elizabeth and Richard thought nothing about spending money. They were just living this outrageous lifestyle that everybody could see. Diamond rings, fur coats. Elizabeth loved living large. There's no denying that.
Like we'd be flying from one country to another country in midair, and all of a sudden we'd decide to fly to Venice for lunch. Things like that.
Original hijackers in there.
During their 10-year marriage, the Burtons spent approximately $65 million on their champagne lifestyle. Richard showered Elizabeth with jewelry, and his first big purchase was the famously flawless Krupp diamond.
Elizabeth Taylor, here with Noel Coward, is the bride's godsister. She was wearing that ring.
Richard rang me up and said, Elizabeth's not very well, and you ought to go and see her. She would love it if you went. So I did. And I went into her room, and she wasn't looking very well. She was completely covered with bedclothes. And then a shy little hand came out and said, "Look, I never take it off." And there on her hand was this mighty rock diamond, which Richard had given her. I think it cost him £1 million or $1 million, which in those days was simply frantic.
The pressures of a celebrity lifestyle pushed the Burtons into a period of heavy drinking and partying.
Elizabeth and Richard were both passionate people, and they loved to go out and have a drink and party. And Elizabeth wasn't that much of a drinker that I remember, but I think if you put the two together, they would drink more and party more together than if they were separated.
Elizabeth could be calm as mud, yes, absolutely. Enormous vulgarity she commanded when she wanted to.
I enjoyed her company, and she was vivacious, and she was bubbly, and she told a good joke, and she swore a lot.
She used to say that Burton was, he was worth having a row with, because he gave us, obviously, and he resorted to very colourful but also rather poetic language.
Burton and Taylor made 11 films together, but it was the 1966 film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, that best captured their powerful on-screen chemistry.
The way that they played Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which undoubtedly was her finest moment, maybe his, on the screen. It's about this warring couple, an academic and his wife, and they're drunk and they're always tearing each other apart.
In fact, he was sort of a flat. A great, big, fat flat.
Stop it, Mother.
I hope that was an empty bottle, George. You can't afford to waste good liquor. Not on your salary, not on an associate professor's salary.
To play the middle-aged Martha, Elizabeth used prosthetic makeup and gained nearly 2 stone in weight.
No one expected that Elizabeth Taylor would even get that part. Mike Nichols, the director, originally wanted Bette Davis for the part. He wanted an old, middle-aged, shrewish woman. And Elizabeth Taylor was still young and beautiful at this point. She was 32 when she got the part.
It was quite unheard of in those days for an actress as good looking as she was to put on all that weight and play that blousy person who was supposed to be 20 years older than her. And I thought she was brilliant. She was terrific in that movie.
Stand it.
I cannot stand it.
You can stand it. You married me for it.
There was only one funny moment in that scene, and it wasn't too funny at the time, where Richard takes me and throws me up against the car. You can hear in the soundtrack a kind of thumping sound. That was my head against the back of the car.
Oh, you! Stop it! Stop it!
And I kept on going, and that was the take that Mike Nichols chose to use in the film.
Oh, boy. You really are having a field day, aren't you?
In a way, it's almost like an awful rehearsal for the relationship they had later when they were both drinking too much and they couldn't live together anymore.
After nearly 10 years of marriage, the superstar couple filed for divorce in 1974.
Liz Taylor was leaving town following her breakup with Richard Burton. And this is the mob scene that greeted her.
There is no question about it that they were still in love with each other. So it must have been a big wrench for them to have parted. And I think it was just the nature of their personalities that they couldn't live together.
But just 16 months later, Burton and Taylor were back together. They were married, this time in Botswana.
They've been invited to a kind of second honeymoon, a tour of this splendid game reserve, and they're saying it in the best way of all. on a helicopter safari.
By the second marriage, it really became where he had a drinking problem. Elizabeth really wasn't into the drinking very much, because Elizabeth was also a mother and had children, and she was a very good mother. And I just don't think she wanted to live with that. So they did part, but I think they always kept in touch and they always loved each other.
The reconciliation only lasted 8 months. The love affair of the century ended in divorce for the second time.
By the mid-1970s, Elizabeth wasn't really sure where she belonged anymore. She certainly wasn't making movies in the same way that she had been. Burton was gone. And there was a kind of a void. It was kind of a big question mark. Where do I go from here?
Elizabeth thought she'd found the answer in Washington when she married her 6th husband, the very respectable Republican politician, John Warner.
I've been campaigning for 18 months now.
Now you're just going out to face the crowd.
She really enjoyed the campaign trail. There was getting out, meeting people, and she was wildly popular. People came to see Warner to see Elizabeth Taylor.
Senator Warner would be in Washington most of the time, and Elizabeth would be in a house in Virginia, which she didn't grow up there. She didn't know many people there.
And she found herself sitting around their house in Georgetown, eating chili all day, and sweets and candies and cakes, and drinking too much.
Elizabeth Taylor always claimed that the marriage was where her weight problems really started. All those political lunches, whining and dining members of the Senate.
She was the senator's wife, which I think she was quite bored with. That's when she put on a lot of weight. She put on about 50 pounds.
Snake-eyed son of a bitch, Marty Fan.
A year later, Elizabeth had slimmed down for what would be her final film, an Agatha Christie thriller called The Mirror Cracked. She was reunited with her old friend Rock Hudson and, with some irony, played the part of an aging movie queen.
Neither of them with you.
Lola Brewster, actress. She's read the script, I'd see a blister on her finger.
Getting his first break was an unknown Irish actor.
The Mirror Cracked was my debut in movies. It just happened to be with Liz Taylor. I think I was 25. I was fresh out of drama school. My agent called me up one day. He said, I got you 2 jobs. One's called The Mirror Cracked. You got to show up Monday morning at the studio. So for me, I started my cinematic career with Liz Taylor. Doesn't get better than that, really.
How I've longed for you, to take you in my arms and clasp you to my bosom.
I had a great day. I had a wonderful time in her company and on the movie. And I have a photograph in my office at home, clasped to her bosom.
Jason, will you get that creep out of my eye line?
Cut. Back in Washington, cracks were starting to appear in her marriage to John Warner.
He would be in Washington most of the time. And I think Elizabeth needed somebody that was companions, that was exciting, that would be her lover, that she could be with a lot, not somebody that was away most of the time.
She was the least likely Washington wife. She was not a Washington wife.
After divorcing Warner, Elizabeth courageously acknowledged her addictions.
I was a mess. And I admitted to myself that I was an alcoholic and I had a problem with prescription pills. And in order to survive, in order to live, I had to change that. And I wanted to live and be a whole, complete human being.
Elizabeth was the first Hollywood star to be treated at the now famous Betty Ford Rehab Clinic.
When she did go to the Betty Ford Clinic, just like everything else in her life, she wasn't going to pretend or hide or make up stories to cover it up. She also wasn't going to apologize for it. She never wanted to apologize for anything. She said, hey, I've got a problem. I'm going in to take care of it.
Refreshed from rehab, Elizabeth needed a new, exciting challenge. So at the age of 55, the actress became the first star to launch a range of signature perfumes.
These have always brought me luck.
White Diamonds, the intriguing fragrance from Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth was extremely involved with her perfumes. Like everything else that was important to her in her life, she was extremely hands-on about it. I think she'd always wanted to design a scent. She talked about it for a long time because she was someone who loved perfume, always wore perfume, even for herself at home. It was part of who she was.
John Dryden wrote, "Where passion rules, how weak does reason prove?" You'll see.
Elizabeth Taylor's passion.
Her fragrance empire is incredibly successful. To date, it's $1 billion industry. It continues to be the top seller for Elizabeth Arden, and it's consistently one of the top sellers of all fragrances.
In the 1980s, Elizabeth's business empire flourished, but her success would be tainted by personal tragedy.
The actor Richard Burton has died in Switzerland at the age of 58. He suffered a cerebral hemorrhage at his home near Geneva and died later in hospital.
Their relationship, which had started like a great coup de foudre, a flash of lightning, continued flashing, burning, searing, illuminating, right through their relationship until Rich died.
Miss Taylor flew to Switzerland for what was supposed to be a private visit, just to have a few quiet moments by her former husband's grave in the churchyard at Celigny. But the foreign press were waiting.
No flash. Can't you just back off? Give her 5 minutes.
The appeals went unheeded, and Miss Taylor then decided to give up.
Just a year later, Elizabeth suffered another blow. It triggered one of the most significant turning points in her life.
Within the past half hour, we've heard that the film star Rock Hudson has died at his home in California. He was 59. It had been learned just over 3 months ago that Mr. Hudson had been suffering from the disease AIDS.
Elizabeth Taylor became involved with AIDS first through, of course, her friend Rock Hudson. And when he got sick and died, I think she was obviously devastated. I think there's no question that Rock Hudson's illness and death is what got Elizabeth Taylor involved. They were extremely close friends.
I think the commitment to HIV totally gave Elizabeth a completely new focus in her life. She'd gotten bored with making movies. I think she wasn't that interested in it anymore. I think she wasn't that interested in having to make her living from the way she looked. She realized that there was a useful part to fame, that she could actually use it in a way that would, contribute to really cultural dynamic change. And that made her feel good about being famous, which had not been such a big deal to her before.
All we can do at this point is help our friends who have AIDS. And the only way we can do that is by doing what you're doing, by giving of support, money, and love.
She, I think, was courageous in standing up there and giving a face to this insidious, disgusting disease at a time where people were being banished and shamed by society. She had the balls to say, look at this. This is what's happening to these poor people's lives, and pay attention.
She took the risk of this disease, which nobody would talk about and nobody wanted to hear about, and stood up and said, I'm talking about it. You gonna ignore me? What are you gonna say to me? You gonna ignore me? I don't think so.
Is this something that we can bear? No. The AIDS crisis is not over.
She did this press conference and she was asked specifically about Bush Sr.'s HIV policies. And she just sort of said, I don't even think President Bush knows how to spell AIDS, and made the front page of the newspapers back in New York and all this. And when you work with her for a long time, you sort of forgot how famous she was, but suddenly you'd sort of be reminded of it sort of when she said something like that, and it was reported everywhere, and it really, really changed the way people viewed how the US was treating HIV.
Let's support the programs that work, whatever the cost.
She was a very kind woman. I mean, that was the thing that's often overlooked. I mean, I suppose that her charity work indicates that she was a very kind woman, but she was personally kind to people, as I had reason to know.
She was stubborn. And she was dedicated, and she really put her whole heart into saving people's lives. But she fought battles that were incredible. You know, and she changed history. She really did.
Tonight, you wonderful people have raised in excess of over $1 million.
She didn't have to do any of this. She was a millionaire. She was a movie star. She had a wonderful life in Bel Air. Yes, Rock Hudson got her going, but why did she continue? I think because she was the real deal. I mean, she really, truly cared about this.
There'll be many people that would not be alive today if it was not for Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth's humanitarian work was recognized all over the world. In England, the Queen made her a Dame of the British Empire.
Dame Elizabeth Taylor for services to acting and to charity.
And Hollywood paid tribute with an honorary Oscar in 1993.
Even though Elizabeth adored getting her first 2 Oscars, I think it was the 3rd Oscar, the one for her humanitarian work, that really meant the most to her, because that was really how she always said she wanted her legacy to be remembered.
While Elizabeth was tirelessly campaigning, her health was deteriorating. In 1988, she was back at the Betty Ford Clinic with a renewed addiction to painkillers. But during recovery, she fell in love.
The actress Elizabeth Taylor has married for the 8th time to a California builder, Larry Fortensky, who was 20 years her junior. The wedding was held at the secluded ranch of the pop star Michael Jackson. The cameras did get a glimpse, first of the guests around the purpose-built summer house, and finally the couple themselves, and the bride's $30,000 gown. As Taylor said, "I thought I'd try it once more before I died."
Elizabeth sold her exclusive wedding pictures for $3 million in order to set up the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation.
This check arrived at her house, paid the order of Elizabeth Taylor, $3 million. And she decided that she was going to go down to the bank herself to personally deposit that check and open the account for her foundation. She got dressed and she called her driver and she got in the car and she drove down the hill from Bel Air and went to the bank in Beverly Hills. And she told me, she said, I walked in the bank and I looked around and I realized, David, I had never been in a bank before in my entire life. Can you imagine that? And it's like, well, yeah, I can't imagine that. You're Elizabeth Taylor. Why on earth would you ever have to go to a bank?
In 1996, her 8th and final marriage came to an end. Her health also continued to decline. She then endured 2 hip operations and brain surgery to remove a benign tumor. But Elizabeth courageously continued to raise millions of dollars for her AIDS Foundation.
Elizabeth had lots of health problems, as everybody knows, and it did impact her AIDS work. There were times when she had to cancel events because of poor health, and we would scramble to get a substitute. But there were times when she literally got out of a sick bed.
I have done this every year for 30 years. And it's tradition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dame Elizabeth Taylor.
In 2010, Elizabeth came to Britain for a special event at Buckingham Palace.
She'd flown over with her medicals and people from Los Angeles to be there to see a new head of Richard, which was unveiled on that occasion.
Prince Charles comes in and is introduced to us, and then, of course, late, making her entrance through Queen Elizabeth's back passages, Elizabeth is wheeled into the room, and as if she is the royalty in the room, she's wheeled in front of the bust of Richard, and she looked at it and started crying. And it was terribly, terribly moving.
I think deep down in Elizabeth's heart was a very special play for Rich, which lasted right through to the end, I think.
I think she probably had a secret
yearning for Burton that went on way beyond the first two marriages, maybe to the end of her life.
I remember thinking she's at the end. I thought the spark was flickering at the very best. I never saw her again. And it was a sad last scene.
In March 2011, at the age of 79, surrounded by her 4 children, Dame Elizabeth Taylor died of heart failure.
She was always a fighter, and she always got over her illnesses. And that's why I was so shocked and surprised to hear that Elizabeth did not get over it this time.
Elizabeth always knew how to make an entrance, and her funeral was no exception.
What she said in her will about a funeral says so much about her. You know, she was famous for sometimes being late on the set. She was also famous for sending herself up. So she says in her will, she wants the body to arrive late for her own funeral. I just love that as the last laugh. You know, from beyond the grave, Liz Taylor is late for her own funeral. I think that's fantastically stylish, actually.
She certainly has a legacy of amazing films and a legacy of being the last superstar, the last legend, the last icon.
She was a broad, and she told you what she felt, and she was spunky, and she was the last of the great Hollywood stars.
I think courage is the word I would most associate with her. And it wasn't by any means easy.
I've heard since the phrase drop dead gorgeous, and that's what she was.
She really connected with people and she really touched people's lives.
People didn't realize what an extremely nice woman she was. She was very funny, she was witty, she was very intelligent, and she was very kind.
The truest, loyalist, funniest friend that anybody could ever wish for.
I really loved her. But more than that, I really liked her. She was fun.
Beautiful. How's it going? Still nobody here. I think I'll do one more tab and then go get in bed. Oh, my nose. Okay, so I've got distillate all over. I gotta clean it up. All right, now what?
Weekends together, weekdays apart, jobs in different cities. But
New York City, it never stops going up, especially here in Midtown Manhattan, where scarcely anybody can afford to live in touch with the earth, unless they started doing so quite a while back.
Here's where I plant all my bulbs.
Yeah.
I have about 400 in, probably too close together.
All personally planted?
All personally planted.
How long does that take?
Right over.
When do they come up?
Well, they come up in, April.
Yeah.
Some in March.
Katharine Hepburn has lived for 50 years in Turtle Bay, a rare square of green ground just off 3rd Avenue in the East 40s. Turtle Bay is walled in by old brownstone houses. She bought one of these in 1931 and set about fighting off the first of several generations of property developers. Today, Turtle Bay is a protected area. The skyscrapers may still enviously crowd the skyline, but she is free to concentrate on how her garden grows.
That sycamore tree is knocking down the wall and eats everything in sight.
It's got big roots, has it?
Yep.
Katharine Hepburn has been a star actress all her long adult life, but the trappings of fame have never meant much to her, and publicity means nothing at all. She is a public figure, but not public property. The press found out a long time ago that she will say exactly what she deems proper and not a word more. The rare interviews she has given have never been allowed to range beyond her work. Getting her to talk about herself would not be easy. After all, she had conquered Hollywood and Broadway by doing what she wanted.
I never bought a house in Hollywood.
Why was that?
I didn't want my bones to lie in that dry ground.
The daughter of a highly educated Connecticut family, which took the equality of women for granted, she was a feminist before it was a movement. Fascinated by her independence, the men in her life have loved her deeply, and Spencer Tracy loved her till he died. But the secret that the two of them kept so long has still never really come out, because the one who's left has continued to say nothing.
So, come on back.
Nevertheless, after months of polite but firm refusal, she had at last agreed to say something, so we all turned up at her place to make a picture. As the latest in a long line of her leading men, which has included Tracy, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, and John Barrymore, I perhaps had less to offer in terms of sheer physical magnetism, but at least I would be making up my own dialogue. More important, she would be doing the same. What would you be doing now if we weren't here early in the morning?
Lying in bed,
Yeah, really?
drinking.
So the heavy exercise days are behind you, huh?
No, not really. Heavy exercise. I swim at the river club and I walk around Central Park when I can get in. But the days of the rich have ended. Central Park is closed in the good weather to anyone with a car, and you have no place to park your car.
People tend to think that the preoccupation with fitness is a very recent event invented by Jane Fonda.
No, I don't think that. No, well, invented by
by Jane Fonda. But in fact, it goes right back, doesn't it?
No, it goes back.
You were
It
fitness.
goes back. My father was a very good athlete, and there were 6 of us. And I was the lightest member of the group, so I was top man on the pyramid. And I just got in the habit of a great deal of exercise from the time I was little.
Was it a sort of Spartan routine? There's a lot of emphasis on cold baths.
Cold baths. We were dumped into a cold bath every morning. 2 still do it. The others hated it. Hated it. And I love it. I swim all winter. I think it's, it's good. Psychologically, it's good because you hate doing it.
Your father was full of ideas. The neighbors.
You mean the neighbors complain?
Well, the neighbors thought you were a pretty scandalous family, one way or another.
Only very intellectual.
Intellectual
Distinguished. Yes.
Because
well, they fought, prostitution. They fought for the equal right of male and female. Dad fought venereal disease in the very early days.
Which was an unspeakable subject. I imagine.
Unspeakable subject. He was a urologist. My brother was a urologist.
And your mother was women's rights.
Mother was with Pankhurst, used to visit us and all that group. I think mother began to think, when she had two of us, she began to think, is this why I've got an MA and a BA degree? And she thought it really isn't enough. And I think Daddy agreed with her that it was, not enough. So they went to a meeting where Pankhurst spoke, and Mother became fascinated. She was a brilliant speaker. She was a wonderful debater. I'm not so hot on that. I live in a more protected atmosphere. But she was brilliant. She was very, first class up here. So was Dad. I'm mediocre.
Yes, I can see that. But you got the idea.
No, truly. I mean, they were both brilliant students. And they were, Shaw was their god. And it was that time of life.
It was a very verbal household. You were encouraged to voice your opinion.
No, not particularly. We were invited to shut up and listen. And I think that was a good idea. Holding forth if you're dull is not a good notion.
Given this very individualistic background, it must have seemed quite normal to you to shave your head at the age of 10. But why did you do it exactly?
Because I was desperate to be a boy, desperate to be Jimmy, which I became.
Do you think you should have been a man? With that?
Well, I wasn't, so it doesn't occur to me.
Well, it must have occurred to you at the time you were shaving your head.
No, it didn't. Well, no, I just thought the hair was quite long. And I was a very good, wrestler.
You're a tomboy.
I suppose so, yes.
But boys like tomboys best anyway, don't they? So,
I don't know. Boys like me, they could take me or leave me. I don't think I was particularly popular with the boys.
Some of the activities that your own particular childhood gang got up to weren't particularly intellectual. You were sort of juvenile housebreaker.
Well, yes, I was. I was the man who could do everything. And my friend Alibaba, God rest her soul, was the one who had the nerve. But she sat on the ground floor, and I climbed to the top and dropped through the skylight and let her in. But I would not have done it on my own. I was too honorable.
These other people's houses? Yeah.
Well, there's no point doing your own house.
There's a lot in what you say, madam, but I'm just trying to be clear.
No, just clear. No, it was in the place where I was brought up and where I still live.
So
in summer, so the house is still there. And we broke into quite a number of houses, never disturbed anything, but accomplished our purpose. We got in. And in those houses, I stole one thing. It was a carved crocodile nutcracker. And I stole it. I loved it, and I stole it. And that house was easy because you could get in through the icebox opening. And they used to deliver the ice in those days. It was before the days of electric iceboxes. And I used to go in and out of that house, and I stole this. And then I had such a bad conscience, I took it back. And that was the end of my criminal career.
Did your father punish you? Did you ever get punished?
Yeah, I got punished, but not for things like that.
What for?
Because, well, for being a bore.
What did he do? Was he a spanker or
No, he just hauled off and hit me. I sat next to him at the table.
He just clock you one, huh?
Yeah.
Did you get
and he'd spank. Yes, I was spanked. I liked that. And then I learned not to cry. So the spanking was no fun anymore, Dad said, so he stopped.
But you learned to hit people yourself. You whacked a couple of people in your time, haven't you?
Well, yes, I might. I have, yes. Why not? I don't think one should hit someone smaller.
Should be someone big, like, say, Peter O'Toole or something like that?
Well, Peter O'Toole, yes, I did. And he should be hit quite often.
Why did you hit him?
I hit Peter O'Toole because we had the same makeup man, but the makeup man belonged to Peter O'Toole. But Peter was not working. I was working down in the cellar in the jail with my boys. And I sent for the makeup man and he didn't come. So I walked up and I had to walk up a stairway and I had to walk through a cloister. And as I clumped along, I got hysterical with laughter. I thought, this is really so terribly funny. Down the hill, I went, opened the door of Peter's dressing room, climbed up the ladder, and I said, and I hauled off and gave him the back of my hand. And I said, the next time I send for the makeup man and you're not working, send him. And he did. Then Peter, we went back and did the scene. And Peter came in with his head all bandaged and his arm in a sling, rolling in. Funny man.
It improves him, do you think?
It improved him. Yes, Peter admitted that.
Let's talk a bit more about your father.
My father was remarkable. I've got a lot of his letters. I've got all the letters that he ever wrote me. And someday I'll work on those because as advice to a kid, I mean, he had no faith in the profession that I chose. I think he wanted me to be a surgeon, and I studied chemistry and physics. Physics, I was so dumb, took me 3 years to pass the exam to get into college. And chemistry left me sort of blank.
I want to talk about your student days in a minute, but first I want to raise a point which you just might not want to talk about at all, in which case we just pass over it. But it sounds to me like, your childhood sounds like paradise.
Mm-hmm.
Did your brother's tragic death put an end to your childhood as far as you were concerned?
No. My father and mother never mentioned that. And I think whatever happened, whether it was an accident, which my father felt very definitely that it was, for very secure reasons. Dad, being a Southerner, played a lot of athletics against Northerners teams in college. And the Northerners were all, for the black man. So the black man had a great sense of humor down there. And the black man learned to hang himself so that he could hold the rope with his neck and not let the noose really slide. He could be swung up in the air and not have it affect him at all. And Dad felt that Tom, waked up early. We were visiting in New York, and there were rafters, and he tried it.
The trick being sort of
to hang yourself.
To hang
yes, to pretend to hang yourself. Now, the boy was a brilliant student, a brilliant musician. He was a prefect. Everything was perfect. But who knows? None of us know each other, do we? Not too well. I mean, even not too well. We just can't get through to each other totally, I don't think. And so there's always the possibility that it was for misery's sake. But my mother and father, from the time it happened, and I called them and they came and all the unfortunate arrangements were made, it was never mentioned. Mother never went to the cemetery, never. We had a professor read the few words, but they never, mother. And it's usually the woman whom this destroys. And for these two people who brought us up with a great deal of freedom, it must have been a terrible, terrible blow, a terrible blow. But they certainly didn't show it to us. And life went on, and laughter went on.
What about you? Because you actually...
Who knows?
You actually just...
Who knows? Who knows?
I think it might have been the start. In many ways, your career there's been lots of triumphs over adverse circumstances. Is that when that started? Is that when did you decide to overcome that shock?
No, not consciously. I mean, I don't think. No, how do you know about yourself? I mean, obviously, I loved my older brother, and obviously, it was a shock, and it made me feel that maybe people didn't understand what he was really like. And then I began to tutor instead of going to school.
What did your father want you to be? What do you think you were studying for?
Well, I was first studying to be a doctor, and then I would have liked to have been a surgeon. And I realized that the ladies in those days, even now, would have a tough time being a surgeon. And also, I just wasn't bright enough, I don't think. And I drifted into acting. I loved the sort of giving little plays with a little theater that I had to my younger brothers and sisters. And I did those plays. But I can't remember. I really don't know why. I think I drifted into it.
But you drifted into the one profession that your father couldn't really approve of because it involved drawing attention to yourself, isn't it?
I don't think he objected to that. I think he just thought that if you go into the theater for a woman, it was a profession for her that would last about 5 years. Mine's lasted 52 so far, so I'm okay. Daddy was wrong.
What did you have to offer as an actress when you were starting off?
Well, what have I got to offer as an actress now? You tell me. I think it's a sort of idiot's
We've got
profession.
the evidence now for what you've got to
Yes,
offer.
but